Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Audio Couple. And today we're actually doing an impression of a loudspeaker. And this time around it is quite a substantial floor standard loudspeaker. And in this case it is the Unison Research Max 1 floor standard loudspeaker. So what more can I tell you about this loudspeaker? Yes, of course, it's a two-way loudspeaker and it's a bass reflex design with two ports at the bottom, and these two ports are front facing. This allows you to be quite flexible around placement in your room, so you can actually place them quite near to the rear walls if that is required. Further to that, it's actually a compression horn loaded design. So the tweeter slash, let's call it my mid-range, is horn loaded, and in this case it's a 1-inch titanium compression drive unit. Both these two drive units are of Italian descent, or let's call it my Italian design. And then it's also got a 12-inch pulp woofer, but it's reinforced with carbon fiber. Also quite a substantial woofer, and I'll share some pictures of both the woofer and the compression driver unit with you. Yeah, so Unison Research is an Italian-based company. They were founded in 1987, and they produce quite a wide variety of products. Those include valve amplifiers, valve preamplifiers, valve power amplifiers, and valve integrated amplifiers. Further to this, they also produce solid state amplifiers and preamplifiers, and then of course they produce loudspeakers. In the range of the Max, they actually got the Max 1 loudspeaker, and this is the one that I'm currently showing you today. But then further to that, they also got the Max 2 loudspeaker, which is a very similar design. The only difference is that it's actually got a 15-inch driver, and then the actual let's call it compression driver horn matches the 15-inch driver in size. Then you also get it in two nice colors, the Max 1. This one in a nice cherry wood type of finish, very attractive, I must say. The woodwork is very good. And then you get it also in an anthracite black, or let's call it anthracite gray color. And that, from what I can understand from the website, it is also quite an attractive color. But I'm glad that I actually have this color where there's a bit more of a contrast on the loudspeaker, and then it's got this nice, let's call it my leather look in the front, which is used on the front baffle, and it is a wraparound on the top and at the bottom of the loudspeaker. Then to share a bit more of the dimensions of the loudspeakers. So the loudspeaker is 950 millimeters high, 350 millimeters wide, and then 450 millimeters deep. So yes, it's quite a substantial loudspeaker, and it weighs in at around 37 kgs. What Unison Research states on their website is that they've custom made these loudspeakers to match their line of valve amplifiers. So I must say these loudspeakers are quite valve friendly. Basically, this loudspeaker is an 8-ohm design, and the frequency response, or the stated frequency response from the website, is 30 Hertz all the way to 20 kilohertz. And then it's also rated quite substantially at around 500 watts RMS that it can handle. So this loudspeaker, yes, sure, it can take big solid state amplifiers as well as valve amplifiers. When I tested it, I basically just tested it on my valve amplifiers, and I produced some excellent results, which I will share with you later when we discuss the performance of the loudspeaker. Just something that I can share with you for interest sake is that the crossover point between the woofer, the 12-inch woofer, and the 1-inch titanium compression driver is around 2 kilohertz, and quite sensitive at around 94 dB watt meter. So now let's talk a bit more about the actual performance of the loudspeaker. So in my setup, I basically just use it in the big setup, you know, on the Manley valve power amps, and then I also use the Freya Plus for preamp duties. But then I use Tidal as a source, and that was basically my main source for content. Further to that, I also used the Benchmark DAC to do the digital to analog conversion. This combination of the Freya and the Manleys produced actually very good results. What it basically did is I achieved quite a huge soundstage. Before we actually talk about the overall performance of this loudspeaker, I would like just to share with you that, look, everything around this loudspeaker is high-end. Basically the cabinet design, the bracing inside the cabinet, the actual thickness of the front baffle. I can just maybe mention to that I think the front baffle, from what I've seen, screen is just over 35 millimeters wide. It uses exceptional Italian design drivers. You can clearly see from the drivers, that these guys went all the way. They used the best components available. Even in the crossover, they used air inductors. They also used Mundorf M caps, aluminium M caps. Everything, from the ground up is basically first rate, so it's definitely a high-end loudspeaker. The pride of ownership, it can be quite high if you decide to adopt these loudspeakers. These guys really went out of their way to design a top-notch loudspeaker, and I'm sure that when I share the pictures with you, you'll agree with me. So what is the initial impression, or maybe the highlight? First of all is that these loudspeakers produce a very huge soundstage, and it's actually quite pleasant. So we enjoyed listening to these loudspeakers, but each time I think I've come to a conclusion as the actual sound. I play the next cut, and then the loudspeaker just gives me let's call it my newer results or different results. So it's difficult to really share my thoughts on these loudspeakers. I think the plus point on this one is that it reveals quite a lot of the information in the recordings. I think that's a highlight. And the second one is that it produced quite a big soundstage. I think every now and then, Teresa will whisper into my ears and she'll say, Jesse, these loudspeakers, although they're so compact in design, they sound huge. They never sounded unnatural. Voice timbre, will always be reproduced accurately, well, according to me. So even, male and female voices were just reproduced accurately. And then further to that is, although it's a bass reflect design, you will never say that. And the reason why I say that is I could never hear any box colorations of this loudspeaker, but I think it's also due to the design. And when I also share some pictures of the actual design, you'll clearly see what I mean is these guys really, put their attention to detail regarding the internal or the overall design of the loudspeaker. So I would say very revealing, and sometimes if the recording is of lesser quality, you'll definitely hear that. So basically what I can tell you is if you don't have good recordings, this loudspeaker will exploit it. And then also I should also recommend and caution a lot of people, I think that you have to partner it with quite good interconnects and equipment, because it can easily sound, I would say, slightly thin on some recordings, but then you must know it's either the recording that is very thin, or it's basically your cabling, that your cabling is a bit more on the bright side. So make sure that if you partner it with equipment, your equipment is not too bright, and make sure that also the cabling that you're using is a bit more on the warmer side of neutral. So maybe in a lighter note, this is the Eros Ramazzotti of loudspeakers, and I think everybody that's into their music know this Italian singer, and he's also known for his energetic performances, and his strong voice. And this is how I would explain these loudspeakers. Quite a strong voice, very energetic loudspeakers, and they're enjoyable, if you enjoy that type of presentation in a loudspeaker, and I enjoyed my time thoroughly with them. So maybe I can also share with you guys that I think that the integration between the mid-bass driver and then the tweeter is also done very well, because as I mentioned previously, is that the timbre in voices are accurately reproduced. Okay, and then welcome Teresa. I'm so glad that you joined us, the audio couple. Guys, thank you. So a bit more of a last word on these loudspeakers, the Unison Research Max 1 loudspeaker. Quite a compact design, but not compact in sound. It produces quite a big soundstage, quite a nice soundstage, and then also when we play acoustic guitars, like I've mentioned, excellent. They really reproduce acoustic guitars very good, and then they reveal a lot of information in your recordings. And as stated before, just make sure that your ancillary equipment is not too bright, and also when you choose interconnect cables between the various components, make sure that it's not too on the colder side, make sure that it's a bit more on the warmer side, and then of course also the loudspeaker cabling, make sure that it's slightly on the warmer side, otherwise the loudspeakers will reveal thin recordings. Then also that I didn't maybe mention before is that at the back of the loudspeakers they actually got a switch. If you are powering these loudspeakers from valve amplification or tubes, you switch it to the valve position, and then when you switch over to solid state amplification, you of course switch the switch to the solid state position. So in our auditions we did play around with the setting. So when you switch them to basically solid state position, it sounds like they attenuate the higher frequencies in the crossover, or they actually attenuate these frequencies, and then it gives a bit more of a pleasant sound when you play it over solid state equipment. Yeah, and then if you put it onto the valve setting, it actually opens up the top end a bit, and then you achieve excellent results. Oh yes, and then another thing that Teresa just alluded me to, or just reminded me, is that actually in our listening space we actually lifted them off the floor with around 220 millimeters or 22 centimeters above the floor, each one of these loudspeakers. At that height, basically the tweeter or the compression driver were basically at ear height, which for us produced the best results. It is true that if you lift them, the bass is not that apparent anymore, but it still had a very good balance between the high frequencies and the bass at that height, and we just felt that the speakers were more open, and that the highs was reproduced actually with a bit more accuracy. A lot of people will say no, but with this type of horn, it's not good to have the speaker maybe at ear height, because then it could be overly bright. But it's actually strange. The more we've actually lifted the loudspeaker from the floor, the more natural the trebles became. So don't be, don't be concerned that when you lift the speaker from the floor, is that the tweeter will become too bright. If you have that issue, that the speaker becomes a bit more bright, I would rather say then reduce the toe in, so don't toe the loudspeakers as much inward, then rather face the speakers a bit more away from yourself, then I'm sure that you still will achieve excellent results. But that's us then, guys. Thank you. This is the audio couple, Nimrod and Teresa, signing off. This time around, we actually gave you an impression of the Unison Research loudspeakers, and in this case, it's the Max 1 loudspeaker. A bass reflex design, a two-way bass reflex design with compression, titanium compression driver, and front-facing ports, which actually gives you the flexibility to place these loudspeakers in your room at quite different positions, which of course will benefit first of all the actual sound reproduction, and then of course also ensure aesthetics in your room. But that's us then, guys. Nimrod and Teresa signing off. If you like our videos, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more of our videos, please subscribe, and if you want reminders, please hit the bell. But that's us then, guys. Nimrod and Teresa signing off. Cheers.